Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, Tracy here from Keto and Crime. Thank you so much to every single one of my patrons and channel members. You make this possible. And you're one of the reasons I do this. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if I haven't said it before, thank you. I'll sing it. Thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with me and letting me geek out, not making fun of me like a lot of other people do, because I like weird stuff about crime and dark history. Thanks, everyone. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Keto and Crime. Today, I've got another long story, deep dive, however you want to characterize that, for you. We're going to be covering the very controversial murder of Dr. Mary Yoder. This is a case that kind of dominated the true crime world between 2015 and it's still controversial because there are still a lot of people, even in the victim's family, that think the person that was eventually convicted for the crime did not do it. And so I'm going to kind of do this in sort of two parts. I'm going to cover the background and the case and the investigation and the first two trials, and then I'm going to go into the blowback from some people in the victim's family, from Dr. Yoder's family, about why they feel that the wrong person was convicted. So we're going to look at this from two different perspectives. If you want to ask me what I think, well, I'll get to that at the end of the video. I'll give you my opinion at the end of the video. So with that being said, we're going to dive in. Yes, still got Halloween stuff up. I know it's like a week before Thanksgiving. I have a feeling Halloween's just going to transition into Christmas. I'm so sorry. The couple of weeks before the holidays, my clients kind of ramp up production, and so I have been slammed, and I apologize for that. But with that being said, let's dive into the poisoning of Dr. Mary Yoder. This case primarily wraps around 4 individuals, even though this family is much broader. You have the victim, Dr. Mary Yoder, a very successful chiropractor from upstate New York, and her husband, Dr. Bill Yoder, also a very successful chiropractor from upstate New York, who also happens to have a PhD as well as a doctor in chiropractic. Their youngest child, a son by the name of Adam Yoder, and his on again, off again, very Jerry Springer-ish type of relationship with Caitlin Conley. And those are the 4 main characters, though we will see many others come into play. But first, let's talk about the setting for where this took place. It all took place in the Mohawk Valley. It's an area of New York between the Adirondack and the Catskill Mountains. If you think Catskills, you think Dirty Dancing. That's where the resort was in the Catskills. And if you think Adirondack, think My Side of the Mountain. That movie and book was set in the Adirondack. So it's a very wilderness type of area. But in the middle of this is nestled very beautiful little communities, very characteristic of upstate New York and places like Vermont and New Hampshire, just very picturesque. And so this is where the most of this takes place. And we're going to start with introducing the victim, and that is Dr. Mary Yoder. Maiden name, Bakert. She was raised in Utica, New York, so in this whole Mohawk Valley area. And to her, a big city was Buffalo. And to me, a big city is Buffalo as well. So, she was a very, very certainly a country girl. at least by upstate New York standards. She was an artist at heart. She loved to draw and paint and garden, and especially pottery. Very much into pottery. She loved it, and she honestly wasn't sure about even continuing her education out of high school. She wanted to get married and have children and garden and make pottery. But she did decide to go ahead and attend a local community college after after high school, and did so well there that a lot of the teachers and professors, and I was an instructor at a community college, so I can get that if you see a student there that may or may not be thinking about continuing their education and they've really got what it takes, definitely you should encourage them to do that, because lots of times community college students, they're not real certain, or they're there for a trade, which is absolutely important. But if you think they have what it takes to go on and achieve a very high-paying career that requires a college degree, definitely encourage them. And so that's what happened to her. She was encouraged by her instructors there because she was a doer. Anybody that ever knew Mary Yoder would say that she was a doer. And they encouraged her to go on and major in something and to get a degree. So she did enroll at the University of Buffalo, which is a public university in Buffalo, New York, actually just outside of it, and ended up going there, just kind of pursuing a generalized degree. Once upon a time, and Mary and Bill at the time of the crime were age 60 and 69, so they're of the silent generation, which is what my parents are a part of, not baby boomers, the generation before baby boomers. So in the 60s and 70s, when she would have been attending college, you could just take a generalized degree, kind of a sampling of everything to determine what it is you wanted to do. And that's kind of what she was doing. She really loved it. She was good. She was brilliant. She excelled in all her classes. Just a very talented, gifted woman. But she ended up, at first, commuting from her home in Utica to Buffalo every day to go to school. But that became a little bit too tenuous for her, so she decided to get a room in a boarding house in Buffalo, New York. Now, this is kind of a forerunner to, not quite a dorm, but not really an apartment building either. It's kind of in between. They used to be a thing, as I said, in the 60s and 70s. And she ended up, but you have to apply to get into one of these when there's a spare bedroom. So you're renting a room, and then you have like a community bathroom and kitchen and all that stuff. So you have to apply to a membership board, very much living in like a co-op apartment in a big city like New York. You have to apply to get approved by a membership committee. And who was on this membership committee but a Bill Yoder? He had also grown up in the upstate New York area and was majoring in philosophy at the University of Buffalo. In fact, he was working on his advanced degree, a master's and a doctorate, at the time he was living in the boarding house. So she applied, and they accepted her right away, and she ended up becoming great friends with everyone else in the boarding house, including Bill. And Bill said he did fancy her. He absolutely did fancy her, but she had a boyfriend. And so there would be none of that until there was no boyfriend. And eventually, Mary did split up with her boyfriend, didn't really cite any reasons. And then just a few weeks later, her and Bill go out on their first date. They were very close, got along very well. However, Mary was nearing the end of her undergraduate program, but Bill, as I said, had been in graduate school. And he had been sort of putting off writing his dissertation for his doctorate in philosophy. So he had taken every possible philosophy course at the University of Buffalo offered, and was just kind of in limbo, had not yet finished his dissertation. And eventually his department chair and dissertation advisor called him into a meeting and basically said, Bill, you've been here 7 years in graduate school. That's enough time to have completed 2 doctorates, and yet you haven't completed one. There are no classes left for you to take. There's nothing left here for you to do. You can't be a teaching assistant anymore. You need to write your dissertation or move on without a degree. And of course, Bill just kind of sat there and finally decided, okay, I'm moving out west. Just nothing. So he pretty much took a leave from school, which I'm sure they were happy to give him. And not that he was a troublemaker, did anything wrong. He just hadn't. I can absolutely empathize with Bill Yoder because I have all the coursework for a doctorate in education, but I had a block about writing my dissertation, so I left school without a degree. You can slap me now because it was one of the worst things I ever did. Now, I did go back and petition the school, and actually got a discontation to turn that coursework into a education credential. So I did end up with an educational specialist for all my trouble. But if I had just did the dissertation, I would be Dr. Barkley. Not that that would mean anything, but I would. So people do stupid things when they're young, just to let you know. But, and yes, I was a teacher and administrator for many years. That was my former profession. But he goes to Mary and says, hey, I can't stay here anymore, so I'm going out west. We've been together for almost a year now. Would you like to travel with me? And of course, Mary said yes. She was very much a fly by the seat of her pants kind of girl, too. And she said, I can transfer my credits anywhere because it's a generalized degree. So let's just go and settle somewhere with a college so I can just finish my 4-year degree. And they took off out west. They put everything in Bill's little car and westward they went. No plans, just driving across the country. And that was the 70s, y'all. They first stopped in Arizona because Bill wanted to see his parents who had relocated out to Arizona and introduce Mary. After that, they could go wherever the wind blew them. That was an actual term that they had said to each other. We're just going to choose a place that looks nice to us. And they decided on kind of a compromise of Albuquerque, New Mexico, because it had a college in which Mary could transfer, and it had all that lovely Zen stuff that Bill needed to get his head on straight so he could write his dissertation. So they decided at first to live in a tent. They had a pretty cheaply made tent. They got one of those gully washers that you get in New Mexico and Arizona, kind of took care of that. And so they eventually went into the heart of Albuquerque and rented an adobe house. So Bill called up the university and said, hey, I want to start writing now. And so they allowed him to do that. And he started actually writing his dissertation, but they still need to make money. So they both go and apply for jobs as delivery, counter, and cooks at a local Pizza Hut. But there was kind of a caveat to that. They both got hired, but their arrangement with the manager was that they would job share. So they would essentially be a full-time employee combined. Like the two of them would work 40 to 60 hours a week, but you never knew who you were going to get. So Bill might be scheduled, but Mary's coming in for him, and vice versa. So they did a job sharing kind of thing, and it worked out for them. When Bill really needed to buckle down and work on his dissertation, Mary went in. When Mary needed to buckle down and work on her, remember she's re-enrolled at a college in Albuquerque to finish her 4-year degree. Bill would go in. So that's kind of how they did it. And by 1977, Bill is pretty much done with his dissertation, and Mary has graduated. They got engaged and drove back to Utica to get married at the end of 1977. They lived a few months with Mary's family and then decided it was time for the honeymoon, and they just took off for several months to Hawaii. Kauai, Hawaii. Getting some Lori Daybell vibes here. Kauai, Hawaii. They basically got on a plane. They used everything that they had earned at the little jobs they were doing around town. They flew. They got off the jet, and they just went to one of the smallest islands. They made their way hiking through the 𝗂𝗀𝗄𝗃 Valley and ended up settling in a nice little area on the beach, and they just lived there like beach bums. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, like beach bums. They lived there. They, did what married couples do there, young and newlyweds. They meditated. They did everything they could, and Bill still had his last chapter of his dissertation to finish. And one day when he was meditating on the beach, sunning himself, and Mary was doing her art, she was doing, beach type crafts and selling them to local tourists. I mean, they were living that hobo life. I mean, no hate toward the Yoders for that. Sounds awesome. He was laying there sunning himself, and he said that a voice in the back of his head said, "Bill, finish your dissertation. You've got a wife to support." So he went back to Mary to their campsite and said, "Hey, I need to go back and finish that last chapter, get my degree, and put it to use and get a job." And so they went on back to Buffalo and eventually Utica. And then by 1978, Mary is pregnant with their oldest daughter. And her name was Liana. She was born 1978 and would later on become an actual medical doctor, an internist, a medical doctor, and she will play a very big part in when her mother gets ill. Of course, Bill did finish his PhD in philosophy, and he started attending job fair conventions to try to find a job. He went to one fair that was an academic fair, and there was over 2,000 people in attendance with fewer than 200 jobs. And it wasn't a great ratio, as he once said. They did live in Mary's parents' house. She was selling pottery to residents and to family and to friends, and that kind of helped support them. And then she was also helping Bill. She would help him do his CV and his resume and help him with interviews. But still, a year later, 1979, Bill's not having any real luck finding that big-time PhD jobs. But then he got a call from a friend of his that was teaching up at Vassar. Now, Vassar is an all-women's college, or used to be an all-female college. I'm not sure what it is now, but it's in upstate New York. It's very hoity-toity. It's very high-end. It's almost, I don't know, can't quite say it's Ivy League, but it's close to that level. It's kind of like Mount Holyoke, that kind of thing. It's just Harvard here. It would be just here. So they needed an instructor, general education instructor, to kind of go over various things. But Bill's doctorate was in philosophy. Remember that? But this is in the old days of education. When I taught, you had to have an exact number of credits in the exact subject you were teaching to be qualified to teach the college level, because I taught at the college level. And then, as long as you had a degree, you were good. All he had to do was study and prep and be ready for his classes. And he, of course, he took the job. And they bought a little house, a little country farmhouse near the college, and he settled into being a tenure track professor and kept the philosophy. All he needs to know is no more than the students. So for 3 years, Bill taught at the university, made great money, supported everybody, and Mary had their second daughter, Tamarin, who was born in 1980. Though Bill eventually kind of tired of just teaching. He didn't feel like he was doing what he meant to do. And they actually took a trip to South Carolina and kind of met with some friends, visited Life Chiropractic College, the branch that's there in near Greenville, and really fell in love with it. He didn't think much about it. They returned home, and he was really having doubts about his job. And then he got on a telephone call with one of his friends from South Carolina who was talking about going into chiropractic. And they talked about how it had become a lot more mainstream and it was a lot more accepted in the general medical field. And Bill decided he wanted to become a chiropractor because it felt like it was a natural fit to their freewheeling, holistic way of life. Mary agreed with him. In fact, she decided, I want to be a chiropractor too. And by then, Mary's in her early 30s and Bill's in his mid to late 30s. But he still felt bad. Here he had a 10-year job at Vassar, making good money. And he didn't know. He said, I'm going to be in my 40s before I ever finish chiropractor school. And then you pretty much have to start your own practice to be a chiropractor. I mean, today you might be able to get on with another chiropractor as like an associate or something like that. But back then, chiropractic was still fairly new. So you had to start your own practice. It wasn't like you just graduated and had a job waiting for you at a chiropractic hospital. You have to go start your own business. So he just felt that, he would be like mid 40s before anything ever got off the ground. And so he spent a lot of time reading advice columns like Dear Abby. And there was a question that came in one day where somebody was asking Abby, hey, I've been accepted to medical school, but if I go to medical school, I'm going to be like 45 when I finish. So should I still go to medical school? And Abby's answer to him was, well, how old will you be in that 8 years if you don't go to medical school? And so to Bill, that was just the natural answer to that question that he had been dealing with. And he said, yes, I am going to go to chiropractic school. And so both he and Mary applied, got accepted to Life College in South Carolina, and went down there and attended chiropractic school for about 3 to 4 years. Now, chiropractic is a doctor of chiropractic, so it's a DC, but it's still kind of the same track as if you were getting a master's degree. It could be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, depending on how much basic science you have under your belt. Bill had a lot more science under his belt, so he finished in 3 years. It took Mary 4, only because of that reason. So while Mary was a senior in the chiropractic college, Bill got a job teaching as an adjunct at a local South Carolina college and helped make money. But for the most part, they lived on student loans. And I can't tell you how bad of an idea that is, but we're talking 70s rates versus today's rates, but that's a whole other video. But once they had finished school, graduated, they sat down, they had a planning session about where to start their chiropractic practice. By now it's the early 80s. And so they discovered that most chiropractors' offices are in big urban areas. And there's not so much of them in the small country-esque suburbs type of areas. So they decided that just going back home and setting up shop near Utica would probably be the best, because it's a very underserved area when it comes to chiropractic. So that's what they did. They finished, they packed up themselves and their daughters and headed on home to Utica, opening Chiropractic Family Care in nearby Whitesboro around 1987. And they ran it together. By this time, their youngest son, Adam, had been born, and he was the only boy among the children. Tamron and Leanna, who were very straight-laced about what they wanted to do, went to college immediately after high school, got married, had children, had it all planned out. Adam wasn't that way. He was much more of a free spirit like his father, and started and stopped college a couple of times before settling in on a local technical college to study computers. So he was kind of a freewheeler like his dad. So that's very important for later. But as I said, they started their practice. It ended up being very, very successful. They were booked solid, and they ran it together. They did the job sharing thing, just like they did all the way back in Arizona with the Pizza Hut situation. They ended up literally splitting the 40-hour work week. Mary would work Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from open till close, and then go visit the local Amish communities to deliver on-site care to them, because the journey from Amish country into Whitesboro was quite a distance, so a lot of them couldn't come in because they do travel by horse and buggy. But she would go out and service them and take not just money, but also things in barter for the services she gave to them. Bill worked Tuesdays, Thursdays as a chiropractor, and then eventually would do the book work, the accounting, all the HR practices from home during the rest of the time. So they had a very set rudimentary schedule, according to Bill. Mary would be up before 6 every morning. She would get ready. He would get up. He would go work out. He would go, if she wanted breakfast, he would prepare her breakfast, but usually that wasn't the case. And she would be out the door by 7 on her way to the practice to see a whole slew of patients. For a while, Adam functioned as their front desk receptionist and office manager, but he finally decided to go back to school, so he actually asked his parents if he could share those responsibilities with his then girlfriend, 𝗂𝘂𝗀𝗄𝗃. And so by 2013, Adam had completely phased himself out of his parents' practice, and 𝗂𝘂𝗀 was pretty much working 40 hours a week as the office manager and front desk receptionist. Now, Adam and 𝗂𝘂𝗀 met around 2010, 2011 at her high school graduation party. He really liked her, fancied her, actually messaged her on Facebook. She didn't get back to him right away, so he proceeded to start dating a 16-year-old. Yes, I know. Bad move, Adam. But the red flags with 𝗂𝘂𝗀 kind of started really quickly because she found out that he had been dating the 16-year-old while messaging her and got all snarky about it. So if you're dating and somebody and you're not really even dating yet and somebody gets jealous, that's a bad sign. But anyway, so that's kind of how they started, but they ended up being on again, off again for many, many years. 𝗂𝘂𝗀's family was well known in the Utica-Whitesboro area. They had a huge farm. They raised horses. There was a lot of Connollys around. So well-known family, well put together family. That she had a good pedigree. Just like Adam had a good pedigree, but that doesn't always account for everything, does it? So, but by the time she started working for the Yoder, she was in her 20s, and from what they said, did a great job. She manned the front desk from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. The office closed for an hour for lunch. She also helped Mary sell 𝗥𝗍𝗄𝗃 supplements, which Mary was a big believer in holistic medicine. They weren't there just to solve back pain. They wanted to help people live a more holistic, better life. And so part of that was Mary sold what she thought were great natural supplements, 𝗥𝗍𝗄𝗃s, out of the office, as well as, it's kind of an MLM kind of thing, as well as sold her pottery. She also grew her own fresh herbs in her own home garden and would bring those in for clients. So just a really holistic kind of a way to go. And 𝗂𝘂𝗀 helped her run everything. She even started taking over some of Bill's financial responsibility as far as, the books and things like that. Now, because of the freewheeling lifestyle that they had literally nothing in the bank for retirement. In fact, Bill really wanted to retire, but there was no way that they could retire unless Mary was willing to start working 40 to 50 hours a week. Now, she was already working close to 40 now because of her long days with the Amish, but that would be the only way that they could afford for Bill to retire, is for him just to become a house husband and Mary to work. He did receive a small inheritance from his parents, but according to reports, he had often said that was only enough retirement for one person, not two, and they were planning a big trip to Europe. Their oldest daughter, Leanna, and her husband had gifted them a cruise in the summer of 2015 around Europe, and they just decided to go fly to Europe, spend a month or two in Europe, and then board the boat to come home. They pretty much end up with the cruise. So they were planning that, and they needed the money for that. So Bill was not going to be retiring anytime soon unless they could sell their practice. And they were in talks with a couple of business owners and chiropractors to actually sell their business. And they were counting on whatever they got out of their business to be the bedstone of their retirement, because Bill's 69, Mary is 60 by 2015. Now, as I'd said, back to Adam and 𝗂𝘂𝗀, or Katie, as she was more well known. Very intense, passive-aggressive relationship. They were head over heels for each other, that kind of driven passion where everything makes you jealous. That's kind of where they were, and they would have all these little spats about should they be together, should they not be together. And Mary and Bill, even though they adored Katie and thought she was a great office manager, had pretty much taken the hard line that she was not Adam's wife. I mean, there was just no way because of the constant ups and downs. So they had already had that in the back of their mind, according to other members of the family. Now, not really so much on how, I think Bill was an only child. Mary had 5 sisters and 2 brothers, so a very large family. So according to those kind of sources, yeah, it wasn't the one. It wasn't the fairy tale. But they constantly in and out for several years. Adam would break up with her, and then she would get him back, and vice versa. And the Yoders were really concerned when they started working together how that would affect the business. But turns out, because Adam had gone back to school to get a 2-year degree in computer networking, he decided, but he spent about 4 years at the community college because he would unenroll and then re-enroll. And finally, he kind of found his footing at a local New York State Polytechnic College, where he eventually would finish his computer degree. But he was phasing himself out of the office to get that done. In fact, school and stress was really getting to Adam. It wasn't the curriculum so much with Adam that had caused him to drop out of college a couple of times. It was the discipline that it takes to study, to do assignments, and to do projects. Like, he was smart enough to understand and do a job, but he couldn't discipline himself enough to sit down and do what he had to do to graduate. So he eventually stopped working altogether. And this prompted him, not wanting to mooch off his parents, who were not wealthy. I mean, they were just trying to save for a retirement, to borrow $23,000 from Caitlin. Now, her family was well off. So that was also a bone of contention, in that she wanted him to pay that back with interest very quickly. So that was another bone of contention between them. Also, during one of their on again, off again breakups, Caitlin said that she had had a ectopic pregnancy and had had it terminated without Adam's consent. And that was a whole big to do. And then the fact that they each cheated on each other. And also, it was just that kind of relationship, the kind of relationship that would make you roll your eyes. And 3 months prior to his mom passing, now his mom, which we're about to talk about the crime, in July of 2015, but in April of 2015, Adam had come down with a sudden flu-like illness. And he had literally been sick for months. I mean, he had literally just started to feel better by the time what happened to his mom happened. This is important for later. And also Katie, they had been on again, off again, but they had just broken up in July before Mary got sick. But during the course of this 3-month illness that had been plaguing Adam, Katie had been giving him brain supplements, like these herbal supplements to help with study and stress. And he had been taking those, and he had been taking them for months and really sick. And then he stopped taking them and suddenly got better. Keep that in the back of your head. But basically, between that, the pregnancy / termination, and the $23,000 loan, no love lost between Adam and Katie at this point. They are broken up, and that brings us to July of 2015, specifically 22nd, 2015. It was a ordinary Monday. It was Mary's day to go in and be Dr. Chiropractor that day. Bill said he got up. He freshened up in the bathroom. He went in, did a 1-hour workout, came back, and about the time he got out, Mary was leaving. She kissed him goodbye and went out the door. He never saw if she ate breakfast or anything like that. She was just gone, and he went about his day. He ate breakfast. He did a little bit of book work for the practice. He took a nap, and was just generally a ordinary day for Bill. Pretty much he's semi-retired at this point, it almost seems. And he was just waiting for Mary's text or call, letting him know that she was on her way home so that he could prepare dinner. And so that was his day. Mary went in, said hello to Katie, went in and started seeing patients, and everything went okay up until lunchtime. Mary had forgotten to pack a solid lunch, so she did a 𝗥𝗀𝗁 shake mixed with almond milk as her midday meal. Had that, went to see her mom, who was rehabilitating from some illness, went to see her, and came back in to start seeing her afternoon patients. According to one of those patients, a woman by the name of Elizabeth Kelly, who had been a patient of the Yoders since 1998, she saw them about twice a week. She was one of her afternoon appointments about 2:30. She said she walked in. Katie greeted her, told her to have a seat. Mary would be with her soon. They weren't Dr. Yoder. They were just Mary and Bill, so very, very casual. And she said that Mary seemed very, very disoriented. She looked like she didn't feel well. She wasn't her normal chipper self. Another patient of theirs, a longtime patient by the name of Lorraine, actually said that she called to try to get in to see Mary because she has suffered from severe migraines, and oftentimes Mary could do an adjustment that would make her feel better enough where she could get home or do whatever it is she needed to do. So she was at work, a migraine hit, and I've had migraines, so I know how that feels. And she actually called Katie about 4:30 to see if she could get in before 5:30, and Katie said, "Yeah, come on." So she came in. She went in, she saw Mary. She said Mary walked in. Mary looked almost green, she said, and she was able to do an adjustment on her, got her to feeling a wee bit better. But Lorraine could herself was pretty sick with the migraine, and so she asked Dr. Yoder and she asked Mary. She had asked Mary many times if Mary could drive her home, and Mary always would because she knew how sick she was, and then they would just come back and get her car later. She actually asked Mary if Mary could give her a drive home, and she said Mary just looked at her and said, "I'm sorry, not today." And then Lorraine went on out to her car, sat in the passenger seat, called someone to come get her, and she said she noticed as soon as Katie had flipped the close sign in the door and started to turn the lights out that she saw Mary's vehicle come driving by, and Mary just blew by her because she said she put up her hand to say hi to Mary, let her know that, you know, she was going to be okay and there was no hard feelings, whatever. But she said Mary just blew by, and she said she saw it in her face when she was driving that she literally looked green, just like the other patient had said. Mary called home to Bill, and Bill asked her if she was okay. Mary said, "No, I don't feel well," because Bill would normally speak to her, and she would kind of tell him what she wanted for dinner, blah, blah, blah. But all she said is, "I don't feel well." And so Bill decided at that point not to cook anything for dinner because she really did sound bad. And eventually she got home, and Bill said she heard her car pull up just before, and she said she walked immediately in, threw her stuff down on the kitchen counter, and went immediately into the bathroom and spent about a half hour in the bathroom. And she was just puking. It was obvious what was happening. And she said about 30 minutes later, it's about 7:30 by this time, said she came out and she sat on the couch. She had a vomit bucket with her, and she just looked like death. And Bill said, "Do you want to go to the hospital? Are you all right?" And she said, "I'll be fine. I just want to lay here on the couch." So Bill said he sat in the living room with her a while, very worried about her. And finally, she told him to go to bed. There was nothing he could do. She just had to wait it out. It was probably a bug. So he did ask her what she had eaten that day, and she had only had, she said she did have a 𝗖𝗿𝗁𝗍 protein shake for breakfast, and she had one at the office while she drank it while she was on her way to check on her mother, and that's all she had had. So, and Mary was a very thin, fit woman, so she didn't get sick often. So Bill said he went to bed, and Mary slept on the couch. She said he woke up the next morning at their normal time, and he went downstairs, and Mary was sitting up, but she said that she felt like death and they needed to go to the hospital. So he basically called Katie, asked her to reschedule all of his appointments at the clinics. Now it's Tuesday. It's Bill's turn to play doctor, to reschedule all their appointments, and he was taking Mary to the hospital. So he took her to the ER, and they rushed her into a room, immediately determined that she was very, very dehydrated, and got her on fluid. She started to feel a little bit better. They got the vomiting stopped with some anti-vomiting meds. He called their daughter Leanna, who immediately came. But basically, Mary started asking Bill about the patients, and he said, "Well, I was going to have Katie cancel them all," and she goes, "No, no, no. You need to go in and take care of the patients. They don't need to suffer because I'm sick." So he said, "Okay." He gave her a kiss, squeezed her hand, and he said, "If you're okay," she says, "I'll be okay. I'm surrounded by doctors." So, uh, he goes on in to see the patients for the day, and they ended up admitting Mary because they could not figure out what was going on with her. And so he also took Mary's shift on Wednesday as well. So now we skip to Wednesday. 5:30 a.m. Bill Yoder awakens to a very loud banging on the front door. He runs down. He sees two New York State troopers standing there saying that he needs to call the hospital. He immediately does, and they say that Mary has taken a turn for the worst and he needs to get there. Evidently, they could not reach him by phone. Either he was sleeping so soundly he didn't hear the phone, or the phone was cut off. I don't know, but they could not reach him by phone. He immediately got to the hospital, found out that Mary had been taken to the ICU. The doctor in charge of the ICU stopped Bill and said, "Mr. Yoder, your wife fell last night and went into cardiac arrest. We weren't able to reach you, but she's now been admitted to ICU for that reason." And Bill wanted to know what happened because he said she was just dehydrated and nauseated sick when I left. It wasn't anything like that. And he goes, "Well, it took a complete 180, last night, and so you're going to see. I want you to be prepared for what you're going to see when you walk in that room." And so, lying on that hospital bed was Mary, all tubes and strapped down, and it was very, very sobering, to say the least. Of course, by this time, all of the Adam and his two sisters are there, and it was touch and go the entire day. Mary kept slipping in and out of consciousness. She kept asking, "What is wrong with me?" And they just couldn't figure it out. And Bill kept telling, "I love you so very much." And at approximately 2:23 p.m., she went into cardiac arrest for the 8th time in just over 24 hours, and they could not bring her back. And so the family just kind of had to say a very quick goodbye to Mary Yoder, who was pronounced dead at age 60, 2:54 p.m., July 22nd, 2015. Because they had no idea what had happened to Mary, they wanted to do a full toxicology workup and all of that stuff as part of at the local medical examiners. So Bill immediately signed permission for him to do that. He spent a few minutes alone with Mary's body, and then he walked out of the hospital. And for 3 months, the medical examiners did all kinds of tests for all kinds of poisons and other toxins to try to figure out what happened to Mary Yoder. And one young professional there finally had an idea, because this is an agricultural area. He said, "Why don't we test for agricultural toxins?" And so they did. And it turns out that Mary was poisoned with agricultural grade colchicine. Colchicine is a kind of a substance that is used in very, very micro doses. It's definitely what you would call a microdosing drug, meaning that there is a very thin line between a beneficial dose and a lethal dose. And according to all sources, Mary Yoder had beyond a lethal dose, like triple a lethal dose of this in her body. It is very effective in treating gout if it's microdosed, if it's microdosed specifically. But anything over that will have the exact opposite effect. In fact, there is absolutely no antidote or any cure for colchicine poisoning, because what will happen, it will essentially make all fluids leave your body. It will essentially begin to shut down and liquefy your major organs, which is what was happening to Mary. Mary had 8 heart attacks. 8 heart attacks in a 36-hour period. Can you imagine the torture this woman went through, this was not a good death. This was not a dignified death. This was a torturous death. And the only way you get that much, it does not appear naturally in any way, shape, or form that you could get exposed to triple the lethal dose. It had to be homicide. So, but they eventually rule this as a homicide, and the local police get involved. Now, of course, as per normal, the main person of interest anytime a spouse dies is the surviving spouse. So, of course, Bill Yoder became a person of interest number one. They began to very closely scrutinize what was happening with him, and it did not help his case that he had started dating Mary's oldest sister, Kathy. This did not bode well for him, but after countless interviews, he was eventually cleared, and they were back to square one. Now, there were a few instances that with the family that kind of shed some speculative doubt on the family's intentions. For example, Dr. Liana, older daughter Liana, started telling friends and family of an ailment that Mary had died of. We'll talk about that when we get to her sister's rebuttal about who was convicted, without really any, demonstrative evidence that happened. There was the whole thing of the investigation by the police not starting until 3 months after Mary's death. Now, that's because they weren't real sure what had happened. And, even though the body was cremated within a couple of days, they kept blood samples and tissue samples of Mary at the medical examiner's office for months doing tests trying to figure out what happened. So the police were not brought in until much later. And in that time, things around the office had gotten moved and had gotten discarded and lost because there was no police investigation. So again, this was not a by-the-book kind of investigation. So for months, the police are laboring over what happened. And Adam Yoder seems to be, the son seems to be on a tear about how to solve his mom's murder. He himself and Katie went to the clinic and gathered everything that his mom had touched that day, everything in the kitchen, the almond milk, the Shakely's powder, and all this stuff, and took it to the police. So the police had some of that stuff, and they finally started looking at it, but could not find any trace of colchicine on any of that. So it was just really weird. This entire situation is weird, and the real victim here is Mary, of course. But still, the police did eventually find something that kind of turned the investigation on its head. They received a typed letter that pretty much laid out what happened to Mary Yoder. Everything from who purchased the colchicine to who put it in her drink, who had the bottle. It laid out everything. And the letter was pointing the finger 100% at Adam Yoder. It gave an email address where the order for the substance had been placed, a Mr. Adam Yoder at gmail.com. It gave them the password to that email address. It gave them the location of the bottle of colchicine, and they said it was under the passenger side of Adam's Jeep. And so they call Adam in for another interview. They interview him. They ask him if they can check his devices and go out and check his car. He, of course, consents. They do find the bottle of colchicine underneath his passenger side seat. Just like that letter said. They search his devices for that email address. They find similar email addresses, but not that email address. And so they ask him about it. And he goes, that looks very similar to some email addresses that I have, but that is not my email address. So eventually, after a lot of discussion back and forth, they realized that whomever wrote the letter was not telling the whole truth. They wanted to know how that drug bottle ended up in his Jeep, and he said he didn't know. They dusted it for fingerprints. No male DNA, no fingerprints, no male DNA found on it. Only female DNA was found on it. And so Adam has a aha moment. Basically, he asked them to please investigate his then ex-girlfriend, 𝗂𝗂𝘀𝗃𝗏. They had been on and off again. They had gotten back together just a few days after Mary's death because she was comforting him, but now they had broken up again, and she had become very, very hostile again. So they call Katie in for an interview. She's acting very strange. She talks about how, poison is a woman's weapon and, kind of weird things like that. But she says that that's not her email address. She has no idea, what he's talking about. So they do a little bit of investigating, as you should as a police officer. And they call Google. They get the login and IP information of the Mr. Adam Yoder email address, and the only places that email has been accessed was from 𝗂𝗂𝘀𝗃𝗏's computer, the computer at the Yoder Clinic, and on her smartphone. The only place that has accessed that particular email address. The only emails in it are communicating back and forth with the order for the colchicine. They also called the distribution company that sold it, and they spoke to a sales rep who said she had only ever spoken to a woman about it. So now they figure they've got their suspect, 𝗂𝗂𝘀𝗃𝗏. They call her back in. They have a very weird exchange with her, which I'm going to play a few minutes of, where she pretty much breaks down and just starts saying her life is over. Yeah. So basically, she's charged with the murder of Mary Yoder. During those interrogations, she admitted to writing the letter, and then, of course, breaks down and starts talking about her life is over, and I'm going to play that for you right here.
Right, the guy's also going to poison. They say it's the baby's fine.
His phone, only you do. So we know you went in, you logged into that account. There's no way. There's no other physical way. You had to enter a password, you had to log into it. Okay? Agreed?
I hear you, yeah.
Okay. There's no other way. He can't do that. He's not here. He doesn't have access to your phone.
Right, I don't think so.
No, he can't. We checked. There's no way he can get into your phone if he's not here. He can't dial into it, be anywhere else. He can't get into your phone. Can't do it. So we verified that.
Right.
So we know you're the one that logs into this Gmail account.
At this point, cops believe Caitlin is hiding something, but the 23-year-old woman continues to point the finger at her ex-boyfriend Adam and to detective anonymous letter.
We needed to know who wrote that letter. So you wrote the letter to the enemy's office and to us, correct? You said you typed that up at school?
Yeah.
Okay, and you got the letters, the envelopes from the office?
Yep.
And which time?
And final interview with Caitlin. Cops press the young woman, searching for a motive.
The only question we have left is why.
My life is over.
Your life's not over, Katie, you're young. Your life is not over. You just need to know why. What drove you to this? What drove you to do this, Katie? Was it Adam?
No, I go to jail. I'll go to jail forever.
No, you will not, Katie. You won't go to jail forever. There's reasons for everything. Why, Katie? Help me understand.
I wouldn't risk my life for this. You don't even know how much. I just want.
I know.
Oh, you don't know. This is my whole life.
I know it is.
So 𝗂𝗂𝘀𝗃𝗏 is charged with the murder of Mary Yoder and eventually goes to trial in 2007. The prosecution paints a picture of a jealous, vindictive woman who wants to get back at her ex-boyfriend, they've broken up for the last and final time, and she wants revenge, so she decides to kill his mother. In the interim, they got back together, so she kind of swept it under the rug. But then they broke up again, and so she sends the letter to the police to frame Adam as a final part of revenge. And Caitlyn's attorneys try to pin it on Bill, citing his relationship with the older sister, which he proves he did not start until after Mary was dead. The lack of anyone seeing her make the shake, which they suspect that the colchicine was actually put into either the almond milk or the 𝗥𝗍𝗄𝗃 powder that Mary drank for lunch, and just the fact that Bill was nowhere around. And so eventually that trial ends in a hung jury. In 2017, she is tried again, and this time the prosecution paints the same picture for the jury that they did before. Instead of trying to pin it on Bill, Katie's attorneys try to pin it on Adam again. Still, there was really nothing. His DNA was not found on the bottle, only female DNA. The fact that the email address was only accessed from her computers, and the fact she was the only one in the office that day that had access to anything that Mary might be consuming. They did add, for fear of another hung jury on second-degree murder, they did add voluntary manslaughter as a potential conviction. And the jury did return not guilty of second-degree murder, but guilty of voluntary manslaughter, and Katie was sentenced to 23 years in prison. Now, not everyone in the Yoder family was pleased with the decision. Of course, Bill, Adam, Tamron, and Lila were, of course, very, very pleased. They felt that the right person had been fingered and convicted. In fact, Adam did a victim's impact statement at the sentencing of Katie Connolly, saying how much he hated her, and he blamed himself for bringing her into their lives.
He's the best person that I've ever known, the best person I will ever know. I wish I could continue my mother's legacy of love and kindness and forgiveness and patience for my family. But the shoes to fill are so big that I do not know where to start. Hopefully in time I will find some answers and be able to partially remedy the blessing of the angel that was stolen from the people I love most. Those people are my father, my 2 sisters, my 5 nephews, my 2 nieces. As much as I dream of helping them in any form of lasting happiness now, I know that no matter what, I can never fill the void, and we're all desperately fighting to cope. I want the lies about my mother and I having a negative relationship to stop. But more importantly, I want the lies about my parents' relationship to stop. Hands down, my parents had the best marriage I've ever had the pleasure of witnessing. I introduced Katie Connolly to my family. And because I loved her, and they all accepted her and treated her as family, as blood, I convinced my parents through multiple discussions and arguments to hire her at Chiropractic Family Care. I am the reason she met my family, and I am the reason she continued to be a member of my family, even after our romantic relationship had ended. Since this investigation began, I have seen 3 psychologists and 1 psychiatrist. I have now been prescribed multiple medications for sleep, for major depression, for severe anxiety, and for PTSD, all of which have been prescribed for one simple reason: self-hatred. Make no mistake, I hate the defendant with every bone in my body and every drop of blood in my veins, I hate 𝗂𝗂𝘀𝗃𝗂𝗃 because 𝗂𝗂𝘀𝗃𝗂𝗃 murdered my mother.
But there was also someone else that gave a victim's impact statement at that same sentencing, and that was Janine King. Her and other sister Sharon Mills truly believe with their heart of hearts that Bill killed their sister. And they have lined out several reasons why they think the police in the investigation got it wrong. And I'm going to go through their reasoning, and then I'm going to give you my opinion and then kind of tell you the state of Katie Conley's appeals thus far. But one of the first reasons that they say that they believe the police got it wrong is because how long Bill waited to bring Mary to the hospital. She should have been brought in on the Monday, the 20th, when she was actually got sick, but instead he did not bring her until the 24th. I mean, excuse me, the 21st, which is the Tuesday. They said that he told him that that at the time Bill told the emergency room doctors that he only thought it was dehydration, blah, blah, blah. So they automatically finger the fact that there was a 24-hour delay, or actually a 12-hour delay between her getting sick and going to the hospital. The fact that Bill did not answer his phone on Tuesday night was very suspicious to them, and I have to admit, that was suspicious to me, but Bill later said that he just did not hear the phone. I suppose that could happen, but that if my wife was in the hospital, I probably wouldn't be home anyway, but I would also be sure to have that phone right there where I could hear it. So yeah, I'll admit that's a little suspect, but it doesn't make him a crazed killer. The fact that he had her body cremated within days of her death, I mean, that's pretty much standard operating procedure. I don't know how long you're supposed to hold a body. I mean, he did sign permission for the medical examiners to take samples of her body tissue and her blood to do testing on because they weren't sure what killed her. So he did sign that, but then he had the body cremated. According to the sisters, he and Adam were in and out within 30 minutes telling the funeral home what they wanted and that should take about 2 hours. Not if you know exactly what your partner wants. But anyway. And then they said the day after Mary died, Liana, the oldest daughter, who's also a medical doctor, were telling people that she died from ascending cholangitis, even though there was no evidence of that. I think probably that was what the doctors had discussed as the most likely cause of her death because they didn't know. They didn't know until 3 months later what actually killed Mary Yoder. So, in fact, her certificate listed unknown pending toxicology on her death certificate for months. And then finally, financial problems. They said because Bill was almost 70 and had nothing saved for retirement, he had made the comment that his inheritance from his parents was enough for one person to retire, but not two. And the fact that they had nothing but debt. And then the fact that older sister Kathy, whom he started seeing, was wealthy, and that would finally allow Bill the opportunity to retire. And then finally, the 3-month investigation being stalled for 3 months. Those are their main reasons for, wanting to take the heat off Katie and turn it on to Bill. I do think that a couple of those might be valid. But overall, being that her DNA was found on the 𝗂𝘂𝗀𝗃𝗂𝗃, that her statements made in the videos that we watched, the fact she was the only one alone with Mary, the fact that she had gotten more and more vindictive with Adam as the months went on, and the fact that Adam was suffering similar gastro symptoms after she had given him supplements and they only went away after he stopped the supplements, kind of showed me that she's capable of doing it. Was probably testing it out on Adam, to be quite honest. And so, for all those reasons, I believe the police and the jury got it right. And Katie Conley did kill Mary Yoder to get revenge on Adam Yoder. And she has been through already 2 appeals. She has another one that is pending this year to try to give herself a new trial. So we'll see how that pans out. If I get any updates on that, I'll be happy to give you an update. And that is it for this story. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back with you real soon with another one. And if I don't see you, have a happy, happy Thanksgiving. Until next time. Keto and Cry.